So I guess to get started, I'll just introduce what FloodNet is. How many of you might already be somewhat familiar? A little bit? Okay, cool. So like maybe a quarter or a fifth of the room. So FloodNet is a project to deploy hyperlocal street level flood monitoring throughout New York City. It began in 2020 as a grant-funded pilot project in 2 areas of the city, which are Gowanus and parts of Jamaica Bay. And it's a partnership between the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, NYC DEP, the Mayor's Office of Data and Innovation, other city agencies, the NYU Tandon School of Engineering, Center for Urban Science and Progress, the CUNY Advanced Science Research Center, and Science and Resilience Institute of Jamaica Bay. And I think I got all our partners. There you go. Okay, I need my mouse. Great. Okay. FloodNet got started in response to an increase in extreme storm events across and their impact in New York. And so in particular, I'm going to talk a little bit about extreme storms, Henri and Ida from summer 2021, a year and change ago. The sound totally just changed. Here we go. Okay. These were record events for the greatest single hour rainfall in New York. There was a peak of 3.15 inches of precipitation per hour, which is like more than double the 1.5 to 2 inches per hour capacity of the sewer system across the city. So there was major flooding across New York City streets, houses, and subways. And during Ida, really tragically, 13 people lost their lives. Preliminary damage estimates were $38 million, but are expected to grow. And overall, 7 to 8 inches of rain were recorded, which doesn't sound like that much. But when you think about the 2-inch capacity of the sewer system, that it's really a monumental amount. An increase in intense storm events, but then in addition to that, there's an increase in frequent coastal flooding caused by high tides. And so this image is from Hamilton Beach. And I'm going to just sort of move through these pictures to show you the progression of how sunny day flooding affects this community in this beach community in Southern Queens. I think for a lot of people who live in parts of the city that are not immediately on the waterfront, this can seem really surprising. You don't necessarily think about tidal flooding as an everyday problem. But this is one of the communities where we have one of our flood sensors deployed. And in a little bit, I will show you you can see clearly a pattern of flooding associated with higher than usual high tides. When FloodNet got started, it's a funny sort of meeting of 2 projects, one of which was seeking to collect community experiences with an increased impact and incidence of flood events in New York, and that is based at CUNY. And the other was through a team of NYU researchers who were interested in wastewater and also in the microbial communities that were changing on sidewalks as a result of this like new wetter city that we're living in. So the NYU team was looking for data sets where they could think about where flooding was occurring so that they could go out to collect samples. And so one of those data sources, and this data source continues to be useful to the project, is 311 service requests related to floods. This is a really useful data set. I don't know if you can see, but the blue dots are referring to clogged catch basins and flooding, and the yellow dots are street flooding events. This is an annual view from March 2020 to March 2021. 311 service requests have a limitation built in, which is that you need a witness to the flooding, like a human witness, to see it and then be motivated to call and report it. And so there's a lot of issues with that, right? One is that you definitely don't catch every instance of flooding across the city. People need the bandwidth to be able to self-advocate, to call and report. And then also there's just a lot of opportunity for bias because you're relying on an eyewitness account, right? And also relying on people having the time and the energy and the motivation to self-advocate, like I said before. You know, and then the other source of data is our partners at CUNY, who have an amazing project called FloodWatch, which if you're interested, you can access at srijb.org/JB Floodwatch. That's a lot, but you could also just Google Floodwatch NYC. And they're collecting community reports of flood instance, and they collect it in the form of photographs like the ones that you saw earlier of flooding in Hamilton Beach. You know, and there are also limitations to this kind of data collection. Again, it requires a witness. It also requires someone to be an advocate, right? To have the energy to report. And then if that data is going to be taken up and used in policy changes, for example, to keep that energy up, because we know that you know, community activism takes often years to yield results for, you know, for intervention on behalf of from government or other, you know, power actors. So I also just wanted to say, let's see. Oh yeah. So one other limitation about these sets of data is that they're a little bit imprecise, right? Like you don't necessarily know if flood images or 311 calls are in exactly the same location every time. You don't get a precise measurement of the amount of flood water that is affecting these places. So as a result, the FloodNet Consortium, NYU researchers and CUNY researchers teamed up to create the FloodNet Consortium with the goal of developing, I should also say the CUNY research team was also developing sensors at this time. So it was sort of coalescence of two projects that were coming from different directions that both were doing similar things. And so FloodNet Consortium was born with the goal of developing a water level sensor network to monitor hyperlocal street level flooding across New York. And so, you know, that we are designing, building, and deploying low cost, robust sensors. I think it's important that they are, to highlight that they're robust, right? Like they are not gonna just like fall off. And they also are solar power, they're solar powered. So, you know, if there's, for instance, a blackout or something affects the grid, hopefully these sensors are still going to be able to collect data and report that, as often happens during hurricanes and tropical storms, right, as we know. So, and then also to develop a data portal to contextualize and communicate data to a wide range of stakeholders. This is the part of the project that I'm helping with, actually. So again, here's our list of partners and agencies and groups that are part of the FloodNet Consortium. And then I also want to acknowledge the community groups that we work with, including the New Hamilton Beach Civic Association. Hamilton Beach, again, was has a lot of issues with tidal flooding. The Gowanus Canal Conservancy, the Red Hook Initiative, Pioneer Works Community Sensor Lab, Resilient Red Hook, Rockaway Initiative for Sustainability and Equity, Bronx River Alliance, and Canarsie Community Development. Inc. And that, you know, that list is ever growing as the locations where we are deploying sensors is expanding. So I'll tell you a little bit about the FloodNet hardware. I will also say that I am not a hardware expert. So should you have questions that are really specific about that, I would be very happy to share the email address of my colleague who is an expert in building these sensors. But, you know, so this is a picture of a sensor. You can see the little solar panel there on top, and you can see the antenna below. Unfortunately, I was going to bring one as a model today, and unfortunately that didn't work out. But the sensor itself is really not that big. It's about this yay size. So they sense water depth with an accuracy of plus or minus 25 millimeters and collect and transmit measurements of flooding every 1 minute. And they operate autonomously in the environment for long periods of time and independently of existing power and networking infrastructure, like I said before. We, you know, build them out of low-cost components so that the sensor network itself is scalable. Again, here's an image of the inside parts, the innards of the sensor. I am not going to be able to tell you much about it, but I can tell you that these are ultrasonic sensors, and they are not cameras. So they kind of do have a camera-like appearance, and we have signage that goes along with each sensor to be really clear about the fact that there's no identifying information being taken. They are not cameras, and what they are measuring is the distance to the surface below them. And so when water rises underneath the sensor, it's able to do a quick subtraction and determine the depth of the water below it in relation to the distance the sensor is from the ground. Okay. Yeah.
Where do you get funding for these sensors?
A lot of places.
Years.
Yeah.
So it was funded initially by a C2 Smart grant, which was coming from like looking at transportation, challenges across the city. We also got some seed funding from an NYU grant program initially, but now the city has funded the development of 500 of these sensors.
How many?
Sensors?
Yeah.
There's 28 deployed so far.
Yeah, I think, about 30, 28. Yeah, so just to repeat what Tika said so that those on Zoom can hear, initially this project was funded by a C2 Smart grant and by an internal NYU grant, and now has been funded by the city to deploy 500 sensors over the next 5 years across the city. Okay, yeah, and this is what a sensor looks like attached to a street sweeping sign. And here's an image of the sign that accompanies the sensor to identify what it is, give a little bit of information and about the city agencies involved. Yes.
How were the locations prioritized?
So I believe, and Tika has a deeper knowledge of the history of this project, but I believe that the initial locations where they are right now are places that were informed by our colleagues at FloodWatch's work, where they already had really deep community ties. So Hamilton Beach, for example, and then also in places where we knew that flooding was already occurring frequently, right? So like Gowanus and that part of Brooklyn. And now we are doing, we're one of the aspects of research that we're doing now is to figure out how to equitably decide where the sensors are going to be deployed going forward. And that's not research that I'm directly involved in, but I could speak a little bit to it if that would be of interest. Okay, well, I wanted to, before maybe we could get back into that at the Q&A portion, but I wanted to also show what the data visualization dashboard looks like right now, because this is a really important part of the work. Obviously, a big issue for equity is having sensors deployed in places that need to be able to show that they're experiencing repeated flooding. But another part of that question is being able to, quickly relate to the information the data that's being collected by these sensors to users in the community, but also at city agencies, so that the data can be translated hopefully into policy changes, but also be useful in community hands. So this is what our data dashboard looks like when you go to it. If you want to visit the site, it's at dataviz.floodnet.nyc. That's dataviz with a Z, a Z at the end. And so each one of these, I'll try to live demo it in a minute, and it may not be super quick or easy because of the screen Zoom combo situation, but I'll give it my best. But so anyway, each of these blue circles is representing a sensor location, and you can see in this image, there's no flooding at any of them, but you can see that the color would change were there to be a flood. So a minor flood of 4 to 12 inches is yellow, moderate 12 to 24 inches, major purple, And then there are some sensors that go offline for various reasons, and those are denoted as gray. So these are links. I'm gonna try. And we'll see.
Can I ask a question while you get that ready?
Yeah, of course.
Monitors, you said.
So right now, they are monitored by folks who have opted in to receive alerts, but also by just like by the research team. As
So I meant like
yeah. Oh, I see. Who maintains them? Yeah. So right now there's a team of people who, or a small team of people who are working on sensor hardware who are based at NYU, who go out to service them when something seems wrong. Things that go wrong are network problems, but also hilarious things. Like recently someone was throwing away a school desk and put it right underneath the sensor. And you can imagine a beautiful flat surface like that, just like red as a continuous 3-foot flood for, several days in a row. And so then, we went out and photo documented the fact that it was a school desk, right? But that's, yeah.
Shortcut to mirroring.
Oh, exciting. Okay, let's see. Yeah, sorry.
Is the ultimate goal establishing a map for emergency response?
Yeah, so there are a lot of applications that this will have. I think, the ultimate goal is not just establishing a map. The ultimate goal is to be able to feed this data to city agencies, but also federal agencies who will be able to issue alerts as like flooding is occurring. And in addition, hopefully to be able to pinpoint locations where flooding is happening in really urgently in order to help with the deployment of response teams. And then I think, a research goal is to be able to ground truth some of the projections about the instance of flooding that is going to increase over time related to, and hopefully that will be able to inform, climate adaptation programs and efforts across the city. Yeah.
To add on to that, of who might be seeing now or somehow was plugged in those agencies, does it include such city agencies that actually have infrastructure that's directly impacted? We're saying DEP, DOT, DPR, plus of course the private utilities, because their investments, their maintenance things are dependent upon knowing where the vulnerabilities are. It's long been said that there would be coordination that went back to the first term of Ed Cochin there, and that's the mid-1970s. We still don't have that. So I'm wondering how your efforts on this are creating those.
That's an excellent
back and forth that are really critical.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually didn't know that history about Mayor Koch, but and I'll try to answer it, and maybe Tiga can chime in. But I know that at the moment, we're funded through DEP, and also that we've been in conversations with the MTA, and particularly the bus arm of the MTA, because bus routes, of course, are like immediately impacted by flooding, and buses have to be rerouted anytime there is significant flooding. So, we are maybe adding to the amount of communication, intra-agency communication that is happening around these issues. We're not like a primary mediator between agencies, but the Maki-J, the Mayor's Office for Climate and Environmental Justice, has, I know, been doing a lot of convening of multiple agencies around these issues. And so from my perspective, that's where a lot of that work is happening. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Yes.
The lifespan of the like data that's gathered, like how long do you keep that information for?
Excellent question. The lifespan of the data that's gathered, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because it seems like you're collecting like very clean.
Mhm.
That's a lot of information. But also,
Yeah. I do not know the lifespan of the data. I know folks that I could put you in touch with to ask about that. I also know that right now the lifespan of the sensor is like the data, all the historic data is being is collected and held and indoors, and that we're figuring out sort of different data analysis tools to use to differentiate a desk, for example, from a flood. And so we need the data to be deep in order to figure out those tools. And it's also founding principle of FloodNet is to try to keep all of this as open access as possible, with the hope that, so there's a guide on GitHub to how to build the sensor from not too expensive mechanical parts, right? And so one thing that we're figuring out right now is also how to navigate data storage and access to data for folks who might be deploying sensors elsewhere that are not, that weren't built and then deployed directly by us. But the data is accessible, and we're also figuring out which platforms and in what form sharing that data would be most useful. For example, right now, we have a huge amount of data for times when there is no flooding. We have lots and lots and lots of records of minute events when there's no flooding. So maybe the most useful way to share data is to create a list of flood events, right? But maybe also if you're a researcher who is interested in something else related to urban flooding, you might want the information about when no flooding is occurring. So we're trying to figure that out, but we're trying to keep it as openly accessible as possible, and we're storing all of it currently.
but one of the things where this
I think there's a link on floodnet.nyc, but I'm not sure. And if you'd like afterwards, if you want to give me your email address, I can definitely pass that question on so that someone can let you know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an API development, but it's not done yet. And there's also just we're in discussions with MIT open data about it. But it's all it's visiting stages, so it's a bit watch this space. But I think we could provide data sets if you just throughout.
Thanks for building that. Yeah.
If we're building it out.
Yeah.
One more question for the
Yeah.
users, the inputters, for how this conference open. Are there any connections with any high schools or middle schools? Because that's the population that would be really most interested in and has to know about this, and will be pushing their parents.
Yeah, the user, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. And so we've partnered with the Advanced Science Research Lab, which is at the CUNY Grad Center, and they have a community sensor lab project that does a lot of work with high school students and a lot of outreach with high school students, both around developing skills, computer science skills and engineering skills, but also around education about climate change, climate adaptation, and the way the city is changing. So so I'm not directly involved in those programs, but one of our partners is carrying that out and does a really amazing job. Congrats, fabulous. Yeah. Okay, so I know I'm aware of time. I think that we are meant to wrap up by 11:45. So that hopefully the room can transition. So I do want to just give you all a sense of how the data dashboard functions. This is a view. Let's see, what is this a view of? Sorry, I don't know which link I clicked on. Oh, I've heard it, Hurricane Ida and Gowanus, right? I could also tell that if I scroll down and looked. Yeah, so this is the period between September 1st and 2nd last year. And so if you see the green bars are indicating precipitation here. And then this line is telling you about the flood level below the sensor that we have deployed on Carroll and 4th Ave. And if you hover over the line, you get very precise information about the inches of flood and the time at which this was recorded. And if you were to check this data visualization tool out, which you can, you could adjust the time period you're looking at by moving down here to the to this time smudge bar and increasing the time or decreasing it back to some, well, it can be a little tricky to get a super precise view, but and now it's dragging. One of the projects that I'm working on is to figure out how to make this tool as usable as possible to community groups and other stakeholders who might be using it. And so this seems to be, I don't know if this is an issue with my computer or this site, but it is dragging despite the fact that I've stopped clicking. Anyhow, let's see. I wonder if we want to look at, I want to show you all also an example of the way that it looks here with the tide data. So you can change the secondary. So this is the black line here is indicating flood depth, but you can change the secondary green line with this menu here and to have it show precipitation or tide level. Here it has been toggled to show tide level, and you can see that during higher than normal tides, there is sunny day flooding at Beach 84th Street in Rockaway. And so one of the things that these sensors enables us to do is to show like really concretely the effect of something like this, like the recurrence of this kind of event. You know, every like full moon, it floods underneath our sensor in Rockaway. And then for another view of the tidal data here, this is over a shorter period of time, you can see, I think this is a king tide event in the same place. So you can see as the tide peaks higher and higher, the floodwaters are higher. Okay.
This is and this how that works.
Mm-hmm.
And also
It's a,
there's rain.
yeah, that's such a good question. I don't think salinity, I mean, I don't think salinity is being measured. I know that we're figuring out different data layers that could be added to this view to make it more meaningful or to make different things apparent, right? Sorry, what was the second thing you said after salinity? Oh, rain gauge. So like a real time. I'm not sure where the precipitation data is flowing from.
I'm not sure of the service data, but we're not doing local.
Right. We're not
Like
ground
the
truthing rain
sensors
gauge. Yeah.
No,
Right.
data collection. That would be an awesome thing to obviously consider. But at the moment, they're just using the weather service on the business.
Still.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, like there's lots of possibilities to further to pursue this direction.
One second, I'm gonna, oh, here we go. Now I have to get my mouse back. Oh my goodness. There we go. Can you export the data? I think so.
We can, I'm just not 100% sure if it's publicly, if anyone can export it.
Yeah.
We're
We're figuring out how to have that happen right now, but it's not, yeah.
coming. Yeah.
Right.
So over the next few months, we'll probably be able to publish more documentation about how to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where we were in that process, but yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like soon, anyone could, but for now, if you wanted to ping us with a request, we could probably share data with you. Yeah. So these are a few more, this is screenshots of data views of particular events. I'm just gonna bop through them. Oh, you're not there. Where are we?
Oh, there now.
Oh, but I just, okay. Oh no. Sorry, everyone. Uh-huh.
When you look at the data, historical time contact,
Mhm.
would even there be now the line that will kind of trend, which would be hydrological stuff, which is like it's not a ultimately you know, remove it. You can probably put in the system right away.
Yeah, I think that's one of the motivations of the city is to inform us about the decision making. But also, you know, it's obviously like flooding can be a difficult thing to always understand the underlying cause. So I think there's also interest in like, you know, if there's a big development upstream, when someone doesn't have to demonstrate that flooding downstream, like that change, like the liability to do for that. Who's you know paying for that change in ability. So yeah, I think all of those use cases are
I'm just gonna flip through because I know we're short on time. I'll leave this up here for a second because I think it addresses a lot of the questions that have been asked. Yeah. Yes. So right now, being more on the trends. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that, you know, probably annually there might be like, well, also part of your question depends on like the level of flooding, right? Because the sensors are big. I mean, but that annually maybe precipitation events might cause sensors to detect more flood events, but that tidal flooding is like much more regular. Like it's just much more sort of like it's experienced distributed across the whole year. Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean the sensors have been deployed for maybe like 20, 18 months.
Right. So we don't it's a snapshot, right?
No, it's very new. And you're seeing this as sort of we exited the pilot phase and now we're going to be citywide. And then yeah, like so obviously some of the sensors are in like the same data flooding stuff. More about the precipitation, but I think not. Yeah, I mean, and this is a big issue, right? This is why flooding causes the flooding is a difficult problem because, yeah, you know, you could have a temporary construction event on that street and it floods this storm event that didn't do that 3 months ago. You could have, yeah, like obstructions, all of that stuff impacts your
Yes.
One of the things this race caused it that Sandy immediately revealed was that the flooding, nature went back to where it was before we added land, which has happens in all coastal cities around, you know, exact where it was. Those were the flooded areas, and that's where it stopped. You're not going to see on the glacial ridge in Brooklyn and Queens or the Serpentine Spine in Staten Island because they're too high up. the coastal areas in Lower Manhattan, Water Street and Hudson Street tell you by their names
Mhm.
what was water.
Yeah.
You know, that's where things came back. So I'm sort of like wondering the obvious thing, nature's like, hey kids, you know, does that fit into the thinking and the discourse and whatnot? Not like it's a secret.
Well, this is a giant question. But I think, you know, one way into starting to answer it is like, is like you say, to think about the historic waterfront, like historic streams and other watersheds that exist in the city but are invisible. And I do think that this work can start to do some of the making visible that you know, other folks have you know, created historic maps, and but you know, that hopefully this work can help make the impacts of development in those places, you know, more visible, and the real-time impacts of that more visible. I mean, yeah, it's a huge question, and it's a question that applies to coastal cities everywhere, coastal development everywhere. And, you know, there's all kinds of questions that open up from that, right? Like about property values, but also flood insurance, and like, as you know, there's a lot there. So, yeah.
Sorry, I know we're out of time, but I want to ask you guys, do you guys use any like proxy data to also just kind of like level, like just confirm your survey?
I don't know.
Like ground truthing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I know that we've taken some time lapse at some of the sensors to do that kind of corroboration. There is definitely work going on with the data team around like, one, yeah, like how do you recognize a flood event compared to a crash bag?
Right.
And so that's like a good problem for machine learning, actually. But also, like, you'll notice that a lot of our sensors are on poles that are already like on the top of the gut. So if we're detecting flooding, you're already getting like 3 or 4 inches because it's over top.
Right.
So there's definitely like a sort of topographic challenge here, which is like if we're detecting flooding, how much water is already in the street? And that's a question that's different for every sensor. But that's something that is being worked on, is like, how could we potentially figure that out and then have that information available? So, you know, you see like 30 inches of flooding in Ida, it's not actually 30, it's probably like 34. And then also some of our sensors aren't necessarily located at the lowest point on the street. So if we're getting flooding, you're already getting flooding further downstream. And so, yeah, there's this whole 3-dimensional data challenge around like making those estimates better. Yeah.
And then if you guys have time, we'll have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just gonna try to make more time for discussion, and I wanted to plug that we're having also symposium on November 4th and at the moment, and there are virtual components. The next one is next Wednesday, the 2nd, from 4 to 5. And there's an in-person component as well on November 4th. And, you know, this is a cool initiative and like really unique, I think, because it is an interdisciplinary initiative. So it's bringing together perspectives from the humanities and the arts and the social sciences. I'm an anthropologist, to lend insights into how this data that's being generated by these sensors can be made useful in a just and equitable way, but also what the data is doing sort of already in the world, and how to make it a point of public engagement around climate adaptation, but also how to more effectively, you know, gather people together around it. So I think it's going to be, I mean, it already has been, the conversations have been amazing, the past 2 Wednesday virtual sessions. And so, yeah, if you are interested in continuing the conversation, it would be great to see all of you on the 4th and also on the 2nd for the Wednesday virtual panels. Yeah. Okay, we can wrap it up there, yeah. Yes.
Oh, you're-
Hopefully there'll be a concussion.
Yeah.
To where, okay, so where would you think of, like, as researchers, where would you think to look for funding if you were a municipality trying to do this? Like, are you tapping into infrastructure? Going to FEMA?
Well, I mean, I think the pockets of money that, so I can like try to list funding sources that we've found so far, but
I
yeah.
guess to give you more context,
Yeah.
I work with the state, and
Okay.
it's like one of the issues we had with IDA was like I was part of the research team that had to create their own flood maps because we had, and it created these huge gaps. And one of the things that like the governor's office of storm recovery is using IDA money to focus on housing, but there's like, if we could just get these sensors to like smaller municipalities up in Westchester, like that's a huge data gap that needs to be filled. And so I'm curious, like, if you have like a wish list of like in your dream scenario, like how would you make these accessible for smaller?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think that the sensors right now are being designed in such a way that they would like hopefully be able to be deployed by anyone. That doesn't necessarily make them affordable to everyone or a network affordable to everyone. You know, I mean, I think, I don't know within like state government where funding would come from, but I know nationally, like NOAA is interested in the data, or probably would be, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
In this state.
Yeah.
And what would be the equivalent? I mean, it's DEC that becomes, but my problem is that they're very upstate oriented. Nothing is wrong with upstate. Upstate's vitality is very important. But for some reason, they don't see the city and suburban Long Island are not there. But for those communities along the Hudson, the Mohawk and whatnot, which include a lot of Rust Belt cities and towns, they become a very critical source for the research and investigative,
Yeah.
data.
You know, one place also to maybe have a conversation is with Sea Grant, because I know that they are Sea Grant around New York City is one of their extension agents has been really important to our work. And they were the driver behind the Flood Watch program, and they're transitioning to a statewide flood monitoring platform called My Coast. And I know that Sea Grant also is in New York. It's pretty unique, right? Because we're a coastal state and we also have a Great Lake. So there's maybe they might have a sense for how to think about this more statewide. I don't know if Tika has.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we've progressed to yet. It's
Yeah.
thinking outside of the box. So we'd love to like get your details. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take the conversation further. But I think, in terms of like how these infrastructures being built out, we're in the stage of like, what should the sort of online or digital platforms look like and be like, and what is the impacts of how they're designed? And so, I mean, hypothetically, a city or municipal outside of New York could buy some of the hardware. We've tried to keep it as low cost as possible, and then connect to the existing platforms, right? And so you can use the maps and the sensor data collection stuff. So I think there's ways to think about it, sort of modular ways like that, and draw on the resources that are already being invested down here. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would also say this a lot. As an archaeologist, I know like the National Trust for Conservation, it's having its annual conference this coming week. A profound focus of which is on African American heritage and connecting that with climate change. But I also know that those organization that, and I can't recall the names, that focus on Native American resources are doing the same thing of linking critical sites of memory and the like
Mhm,
with the entire environmental
mhm,
issue.
mhm.
So there's a level of creativity that's going into this, that's doing multitasking. It's really very creative.
Yeah,
So one shouldn't just look at the cold climate or as a cold environment. It's maybe coming under something else for which those are critical elements.
yeah, that's a good suggestion too. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. And thanks for all your questions. It was really generative and wonderful conversation.